I wanted to give a brief introduction into today's video. It's probably the last in the series of how I established my home market garden bed. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the Wobbler sprinkler head system. So if you stick around to the end of the video, I will give you a complete overview of the system. So I hope you'll watch it to the end, and you're going to have to subscribe if you're going to want to see what we're doing going forward. All right, enjoy the video. I just finished adding to my Wobbler sprinkler system. I did mention that I would talk to you all about the Wobbler system or zone that I installed. I ended up going with a small head. I have a large one down on the end, and over here I have another small head. I've run the system, checked it for leaks. Everything's working fine. At some point, I think I'm going to, on the one in the far end of the garden, I'm going to put a small Wobbler head on it, and I'll probably add one more lower Wobbler setup in this row here down that way. Before we get into that, I want to talk about several ways you can control a zone for your market garden. I got my hands full. Let me put some of these down. This is one of many types of battery operated controllers. See, they have a battery in the back. Typically you're going to have two. I think they're these are AAA. Two AAA batteries typically, and you could set to go on auto. You set your clock, start time, how long, how often, and it does have a manual override you can push, and I think it runs it for about 10 minutes. Typically, this type of system you'd use off your house water, city water. Line goes in. You're going to typically install some type of a pressure regulator, and then either the hose would go right here, or this is set up to connect to a half-inch poly tubing. About a $30 controller. Again, if you guys need something simple for your garden, this would work just fine. And from there you could set up the Wobbler system. I'll show you how I added an extra Wobbler, and from there you'd get the gist of how to install the whole system. Let's talk about the Hunter node. All right, I had these installed and I've since removed them. Basically, you have a controller here. It's operated by, I believe it's two 9-volt batteries. You can program your timer when it should go on, when it should go off, how many times a day, things of that nature. So you'll use this on a typical sprinkler system valve. I think they're about a 1-inch inlet and outlet. I'll show you that in just a minute. But what's unique about this controller, you need to have this type of a solenoid to get the valve to operate, versus if you use a electric controlled controller off a 110 system, and I'll show you that in just a second. So again, this is another way. If you have an existing sprinkler system, you can add another valve and have it controlled if you have limited access to electric. Sometimes the situation is you don't have access to electric. Your existing control panel might not have any more room for adding other zones, and this is an option. This is about $100. It does not come with the valve, but it comes with the solenoid. This is a new valve. I typically have at least one spare part of each component. Now, I didn't notice this originally, but this is a threaded one, which would work. I now just have to buy an adapter. But this is your typical, if I can get this off, it's sticky, control valve. And I'm not sure what brand this is. It's a Rainbird. Typically I'm using Hunters. I had placed an order, I reached my free shipping, so I opted to buy one of these. This is where that solenoid would screw onto. This is set up to work off an electric powered controller. So again, if you wanted to add an extra zone to your sprinkler system, you'd tap off your main feed, it would come in here and then exit out. Actually, it's this way, the flow. And then you could run your additional sprinkler zones. So that would be the valve you need if you're going to run an additional zone off your sprinkler system. Let's go in the shed and I'll show you that other controller that I've been talking about. Inside my shed, I installed this controller. This is about a $70 unit. I think I got it on Amazon, but you could see here, I have a lizard right there. There's my power source. It runs over to, well, it's plugged in right there. You could see it right back over there. And then you have your wires that control your zones. I have currently 2 zones hooked up here. One is for Stacy's garden. The other one does my market garden and food forest. And what I like about this, let me see, I don't have my tripod, but it's really simple. That's your on. You could set your various zones and you could see the days of the week, and you have zone 1, or not zone 1, first times all the way through 4 times, and you could turn a particular zone off. Again, this is a 6-zone controller, so I have the option to expand this 4 more times. I have this same controller inside my garage that controls my sprinkler system. So this would be the controller you would use if you have access to electric and you want to add on to an existing sprinkler system. You use that valve I showed you, run some PVC, and then from there you can run either a Wobbler system, drip irrigation, or even the Maxi Jet micro irrigation. So in my previous video, you saw how I installed the drip irrigation, right? We have that main manifold. You can poke a hole with a special tool. You have your valves, and then you can run your lines. There's several ways you can water whatever your context is, right? If you have a raised bed or a garden, you could use drip irrigation, probably the most efficient from a gallons per hour usage. Not always the best option. Sometimes you need a larger volume of water. That's why I've installed my Wobbler heads. This is the Maxi Jet, all right? These use about 5 gallons an hour. You have a 360 degree head or a 180. These work really well, but again, they're going to use more water than a drip irrigation. This is running off my zone that's connected to my well. There's Primo out. He's been walking around. There he is over there in the shade. The Wobbler system, along with that Maxi Jet, my food forest, and inside my greenhouse, the raised garden bed in front of the greenhouse, are all on one zone. Now, when you tap off your well line, it's going to be important that you balance that out. If you have a tank system, when the tank drains down to a certain amount of pressure or gallons of water, it's going to turn the pump on. You don't want your pump to cycle on and off. So when you balance it, once it kicks on, it should run if you have a small holding tank. If you get into some of the bigger tanks, might be a little bit different scenario, but that's one thing that you need to be mindful of. If you're going to tap off your well for like the sprinkler system, make sure you balance out that zone. The simplest way is to tap off a hose bib with one of those battery operated timers. So let's take a look at some of the steps and components that I used to add my 3rd Wobbler head setup right over here. All right, let's take a look at that right now. So I'm going to install my additional Wobbler head. I'm going with a 16-inch length of 1/2-inch PVC. Let me grab a couple of components here. Try to come a little closer. I have my cameraman Giovanni helping me today. Can you see this, Giovanni? Can you see this? Okay, so I have 2 1/2-inch fittings that are threaded on one side and smooth on this side, so I can glue it together if I wanted to. So the wobbler head screws on to this piece. This goes on top here. You would normally glue it, and here's the bottom piece. Again, it's threaded on one side. I have this adapter. It'll take the 1/2-inch poly tubing, slip right on, then it screws in here, and that'll go on the bottom. So basically that's my wobbler head setup. I purchased a 4-foot T-post. I wanted 3. They didn't have it, but they were kind enough to honor the price. I have to fix this end where I cut it, but basically I'm going to drive this into the ground and I will secure my wobbler head setup with some plastic ties. And then it'll tee off on the bottom here to go to the wobbler head back there. Now this is a small wobbler head. I have a large one over here on this short. I'm going to swap this small for the larger one. Let me show you what that looks like. Here's the larger head. All right, and they come with different valves inside. It might be hard to see. It's just the orifice size. And basically the water comes up through here and it causes the head to wobble around. And I'll show you that in a little bit more detail. Here's the T connector I'm going to use for the poly tubing. I'll make a cut in my existing run and we'll splice this in, and this will come up to my post. Before I go ahead and drive this post in, I like to dig a hole to ensure I don't have any sprinkler system irrigation. I do have a head over to the side here, and if there was a pipe and I just hammered this into the ground, potentially if I hit that pipe I'm going to put a hole in it. I actually did that inside the greenhouse when I installed my round bed. I used my broad fork and caught a pipe. So what I like to do is go down about 6 inches. That's usually the depth, 6 to 8 inches tops. Make sure I don't have a pipe there. Then I'm okay to say, where do I want this? And I'll take my hammer and I'll drive this into the appropriate height. What I've done is I cut out a section of my poly tubing, and what I used is this box cutter or utility knife. Cut through here, and that's the piece to accommodate for my T section. I have a short section of the 1/2-inch tubing, and I'm just realizing it's not the heavier commercial grade, so I'm going to swap this out if I can find this. And basically I'll come back once I fill a hole in and get everything lined up, and I'll put 2 wire ties here. I still need to swap this out for the larger one and put the small one over here. Basically that's how easy it is to add another head to the wobbler system once you have it here. It would be no different if you ran a new system. You'd lay down your 1/2-inch poly tubing. You could also use 3/4 inch, and it would be the same setup. So very simple system. Under here I have the valve that I installed. Again, it taps off the main water line from my well system that feeds my lawn irrigation system. There's a picture. As I talked about in the controller setup, this is coming off the controller that's in my shed, so we already talked about that. It's probably hard to see, but down there you can see the PVC exiting out. I have waterproof connectors here, and this is a little clean out valve right there if you can see it. So that's the valve. So taking it back to the beginning, I wanted to add a zone that was tapped off my existing well. To do that, I had to tee off the main line. Actually, it comes out of the holding tank, and that's the line that would then go and feed my lawn irrigation system. So in that section, I inserted a T and came out in front of my greenhouse where I installed this valve. This 1-inch PVC goes all the way across to the side of my property into the food forest. Coming off the control valve underground, this is looking as I'm heading to the side of my property. I have a 1/2 inch PVC that came up and 90 degrees into my greenhouse, and you could see the 1/2 inch poly tubing. What's really nice about that is feeding everything inside the greenhouse, and I do have 2 maxi jet micro irrigation heads also tapped off of that. So that's one connection to that new control valve. Right here is my second connection coming off that main line, off that valve. So this is connection number 2. You can see the 1/2 inch poly tubing. Once again, I have 3 maxi jets connected. So that is line or connection number 2. And finally, right there is the end of that run. So that's a 1 inch PVC pipe coming out of the valve. I reduced it down to a 3/4 inch, and in the end I came up with a 1/2 inch. And those are just quick connects. Again, there's a 1/2 inch poly tubing connected here, and I'm running all of my maxi jet micro irrigation off of that. So I have 3 lines connected to that one valve. And again, that's all controlled by the electric controller in my shed. For my Wobbler sprinkler head zone or system, there's that main line, the 1/2 inch, and over here I teed off and I have a shut-off valve. So again, everywhere I make a connection, I like to have a shut-off valve. That gives me the option to isolate different areas of my food forest, greenhouse, or home market garden. There's a shut-off valve over here. I also have one over here. Again, I teed off, and there's my shut-off valve. Earlier, come on, Primo, come here. Earlier, I talked about the different types of controllers, and here's Primo, he's all soaking wet, he's out here playing with his ball. The different controllers and different ways you can install an irrigation system. So as I talked about, mine is being fed off my existing well. You could have connected it right here. This is where I come into my 1/2 inch poly tubing. You could have connected it to a battery operated timer that I talked about with that pressure reducing valve. Again, you probably want to step it down to 25 psi for this system. The drip irrigation is 8 to 12, somewhere around there. But again, the point is, you could have connected this right here to your hose bib with a timer, just ran the poly tubing over to your garden or whatever it is you're trying to irrigate, and then you could just run your poly tubing. You see how simple it is to run it right down, and then you could connect it via a T connector, or at the end run you just use a 90-degree connector. Now let's take a look at the Wobbler sprinkler head system in action. I think it's a great way to water your garden. Depending on your context, it may or may not be a good fit for you. Again, this is what's working for me, along with the drip irrigation. I have to reshoot this whole ending. I was talking about how I'm getting tangled up in this, and I have a cordless mic, but sometimes I lose the audio. And right on cue, as I'm doing take 2 here, I got Primo barking, so hold tight, I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Maybe I can finish this video. Oh, it's getting hot. So, now, we've talked about my drip irrigation. Today's video, I talked about my Wobbler system. So I think we're caught up as far as where I'm at today in my home market garden. There's a lot of questions asked on some of the groups I'm on Facebook, whether it's the home market gardener Birdie's raised garden beds, Spring Hill gardening. People, when they're adding a garden or some raised beds, they have questions about, how do I install a system? I can't afford to pay a professional. So hopefully this helps as to what I did. There's a lot of ways to do it. You could just use a hose, and I often do that. I have my hose link over here. Not getting paid for any of this stuff. I'm not looking to monetize my channel. Another reason why you should subscribe. You're getting honesty here. I'm not pushing any type of a video or content for any monetary reasons. I'm a cancer survivor. I just want to share what I've learned over the years. I don't claim to be an expert. It's what I'm doing. This is my journey. Anyway, so you could hand water with a hose. Again, today's video was just about me explaining the Wobbler system, because I had mentioned it in prior videos. It's getting hot. I'm going to end this video. Again, if you don't want to miss any of this information, you're going to have to subscribe. And we'll see you at the next video. All right. I do want to say, I hope this finds everybody well if you stuck it out through the end. And I wish you great health and start growing. All right, cheers. I need to get another one. We'll see you on the next video.